Everybody, welcome to the Coding Zoo. If this is your first time joining, my name is Shane, and this is the Java playlist at the Coding Zoo. In today's lesson, we're going to cover shortcut operators for arithmetic. It's some of the basics you would first learn when you're learning Java. So if you're not familiar with that, hey, stick around. We're going to jump right in. So on my desktop here, I have a class. This class has a main method, which is your starting point when you run it as a Java application. The first few lines I have here creates a variable called count, and that count variable is an integer. So I'm basically creating a variable, and it's assigning the value 0 to it. So it's going to, when it runs, it's going to create a variable in memory and put the value 0 in it. And then I use a system.out print to print the variable. Let's run it real quick, make sure it works. So I'm going to do Alt-Shift-X, the keyboard shortcut to run. Press J for run this application. And there we go. So it ran it in the console here. You can see there's a 0. So it created the variable, and then it printed it out. So the next line is basically a shortcut arithmetic operation. So usually you might add 1 to count by doing this. Count equals count plus 1. Let me fix my keyboard. It's kind of in a weird spot. Can't hardly type. So this is the long way of saying, hey, count plus 1. Now that's one way to do it. A quicker and shortcut for doing this is the very next line, which is count plus plus. So let's try that real quick. Okay, so I'm going to uncomment these two lines, and I'm going to run it. Now this is the same as saying count equals count plus 1. So let's run it. And there we go. Okay, so you can see here after I ran this that it first set the count to 0, and then it printed out 0. Then it did count plus plus, which is the same as doing count equals count plus 1. I just added this comment. So, and then it printed it out. So I should have a 0 and a 1 when I run it. There's my 0 and my 1. Now that's pretty simple, pretty easy to understand. But in this example, I'm actually making the assignment, I'm doing the arithmetic, and then I'm printing it out. What would happen if I were to put that all in one line? Would there be any difference? Let's check that out real quick and see. Okay, so this stayed as a 1, but it should have turned into a 2, because this sets count to 0, this sets count to 1, and then this adds another one to it, which should make 2. So to make things simpler so you can understand, I'm going to set count back to 0 here. So now that I have count back to 0, I'm going to run this again. You would think that it's going to be count equals count plus 1, so this will equal 1, and then it'll print out. Let's see if that happens. So first it's 0, we print it out, then it's 1, we print it out, and then we initialized it back to 0. We did count plus plus and tried to print it out, and it came as 0. So what's happening? Well, the system.out.print line is running first. It passes in this variable, and then prints out that variable. Well, that variable happens to be signed to 0, and then it adds 1 to that variable with the count plus plus. So because the plus plus is on this right side, it does things in that order. It does it all in that order. Now, if I were to uncomment the next line, you'll see that after it first prints it out, it prints out the 0, it goes ahead and adds 1 to it. So if I run this system out print line count, beneath that, you're going to see 1 printed out. Let's try it. So there you go. So first we have 0 printed out, then we have 1 printed out. We put it back to 0. We printed it out. it did not add the 1 to it. It printed it out first. So that means we got the 0. Then it added 1 to it. And then we printed out the variable again. And then we can see that it did indeed add the 1 to it, but it added it after the first print. So just remember when you're working with these shortcut arithmetic expressions that the order does matter in situations kind of like this. What's a way you could do that different to where the order didn't matter? Well, let's try this. So I'm going to set count back to 0 just so it'll be easier to understand. And let's uncomment out these 3 lines. I'm going to comment these lines back here just to get them out of the way. Okay, so we have count equals 0. We're adding 1 to it. Hopefully we're going to print it out after we add 1, and then we're going to print it out again. So if this works correctly, if this will actually do the addition first and then print it, then both 1 should be printed out both times with both these print statements. Now before we saw if it was count plus plus, well, it wouldn't print out 1, it'd print out 0 because the math would be done after the fact, after the print line is called. Let's run it. So there you go. So you can see that the first print statement runs. It first does the addition and then passes the value to print line, the method print line on the out object. And then the very next line prints it out again. So again, plus on the left side means that the arithmetic will happen first before it's passed to a method. If the plus is on the right side, well, it will happen after it's passed to a method. And of course, again, if you do it out here and you're not passing it to a method, it doesn't really matter that much. So let's move to the minus here. We saw how we can do addition. Here's how you do it. Subtraction. All right, so gonna run it. All right, so here we have the 1 being printed out. We have the 1 being printed out again, and then we have the 1 being printed out again, and then the subtraction being done after the fact, and then we have count. We can see that, well, since that subtraction is done after this print, we can see the next line prints out the count variable after the 1's been taken away, so it's back to 0. So again, the order matters. Let's go ahead and let's change this to be before. So I'm going to change that to before, get rid of those 2, and I'm actually just going to get rid of these 2 lines here. We're going to use those lines above. All right, so let's try that again. So the first thing we see is we print out the number 1. We print out 1 again. Then we subtract 1, which would make it 0, and then we print it. So that prints out 0 right here. And then we print it again, and of course it's still 0. So we have addition, we have subtraction. These are all shorthands. You know, this is a shorthand for count equals count minus 1. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. It's very some of the basics. It's some of the basics for Java, kind of little stepping stones till we get to the more complex stuff, the good stuff, as I like to say. You got to learn these things first, but no worries. We're going to get into a lot more interesting, a lot more complex stuff in the future. If you have any questions, hey, leave me a message below. I'll definitely get back to you. Try me out. I will definitely get back to you. If you enjoyed the video, click like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, click subscribe and click the little bell icon. That'll let you know when we get more videos in the future. I'm here to help you learn how to program. That's my passion, is teaching others. If you know of anybody else who would like to learn with us, hey, send them my way and let them know about our videos. So thanks for joining. I hope you have a great week. Bye.